Aaron, do you know if um, Commissioner Rice will be joining us?
I don't believe he will be. We've been playing phone tag. Originally I was supposed to go down there tonight, but I didn't hear anything from him. So
Okay.
He usually calls to tell me if he is going to be here, but I didn't hear anything from him. So I would suspect not.
All right. Well, why don't we get started? Since I believe we have everyone except Erin Tobin, and she said that she wasn't going to be able to make it.
Yes.
All right, I'll call the meeting to order then. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Historic Resources Commission of the City of Albany. This evening is a workshop for the commission. If there are people in the general public that want to make comments, they certainly are free to do so in the time designated and limited to 3 minutes in duration. But otherwise, we are assembled. Commissioner Pinckney, Commissioner McEnany, Commissioner Garrity, Commissioner Hacker, Commissioner Kaplan, and myself, John Myers, the chair, are all in attendance. Aaron Glennon from the planning office representing the commission, and Amy Levine from the law department representing the keeping us all honest in our deliberations. So with that, I will declare we have a quorum and we can proceed with our meeting.
Perfect.
The discussion item in the workshop this evening is the common law or common council local law M and their proposed alteration to the ordinance or the local law related to the Historic Resources Commission membership and emergency action notification process. So Aaron, if you want to bring us up to speed on where we are.
Sure. I apologize, the slides are going to be very text heavy tonight, but this is the amendment to the HRC local law M in chapter 42 of the city's code for membership, and then also the ordinance from Councilmember Conti specific to establishing an emergency action notification for properties in historic resource overlay districts, our local historic districts, and notifying when either an emergency demolition or an emergency stabilization take place. So just to kind of briefly go over the amendments to the law. What Councilmember Conti is looking to do with this is bring HRC's member appointments and reappointments more in line with both the planning board and the Board of Zoning Appeals. So currently there is no time frame for filling positions. And what they're proposing to do is put a 30-day period for reappointments of either expired terms or vacant terms. Amy brought up at the Common Council Land Use Committee meeting that 30 days for the HRC is a very tight period, in part because we are A 9-member board. 2 positions have to be filled by professional archaeologists, and the other positions need to be drawn from very kind of specific interest or professions, which does make it a little bit more difficult to fill positions within a 30-day period, because of kind of the specific knowledge that members have to have, and that we are pulling strictly from within the city boundaries. So finding people can be a little bit challenging. And we did kind of put forward that reappointments would be fine to take place within 30 days, but maybe extending the period for filling new vacancies. I believe it might have been 90 days is one of the time periods in which we had floated at the committee.
Yeah, that was my recollection of the discussion at that meeting, that suggesting 60 or 90 days
Right.
for filling a vacancy.
I think for, expired terms, if we're just reappointing from our current membership, I think that the 30-day period, it's fine. But I would recommend that they extend the section B that says A on the slide. I apologize, it's supposed to be B. Extend that out to a longer period.
Erin, I'm going to recommend that they remove the 30-day expiration period altogether. I certainly think that it would be helpful for it to be a longer time period, but I don't think that they need to have that in the statute at all. It's really up to the mayor to decide, when she's going to appoint somebody. And, Councilmember Conti was fairly straightforward at the meeting, saying that, if there's not an appointment within 30 days, basically nothing happens. So,
right. And that's, we're supposed to be 9, we're currently only 8. And that second archaeologist position has been, we've been proceeding without it filled. So,
yeah, I think we can get to that later.
Okay.
Yeah. The board seems to be functioning fine, though.
In that time period, at least for the reappointment, I know in the past we have had, when one has been up for appointment or reappointment, there have been appearances before the land use committee, because for them to fulfill their obligation for consent. And does the 30 days include scheduling and appearing before that committee, or how does that what does the time frame encompass?
The language that they used here is different than the language for both the planning board and the zoning board. As I read it, this would be 30 days for the mayor to issue the letters, but it wouldn't necessarily, put a time period on, how long they have to make their recommendation. And so if anything, I would like to see them change this so that it has the same language that's used for either the zoning board or the planning board, that both of those, I believe, put a 40-day time period in terms of from whenever the mayor issues the letters, they have 45 days to give their advice and consent. Mm-hmm. So they can't just hold up those appointments indefinitely. And I would certainly say that I think that's fairly important, having just gone through this process with the planning board, or with 2 planning board members, and they seem to want to draw it out unnecessarily. And, we don't need that.
Yeah. Okay.
Clarify, who are these committees that are passing on this? Is this the internal committee that are all members of the Common Council?
Yes, this is the Common Council Land Use Committee.
Okay,
And these are,
yeah, not to be not to be confused with the General Planning Board of the City of Albany type of thing. This is.
correct.
Okay, it's
Yep.
internal, internal,
Mhm.
okay.
And then the Second Amendment to the law is putting in the provision for adding section 13, which is establishing the review of policies and procedures in relation to emergency actions, and making this a standing agenda item on the Historic Resource Commission for Historic Resource Commission meetings. I guess, Amy, the one I was thinking about this as I've been going through, if we added this as a standing agenda item and there were no emergency demolitions or stabilizations, as long as it's there, we're covered, correct? Like if there's no items to discuss, we don't have to.
I mean, I think there are a lot of questions about what this review is supposed to look like. But it seems, at least I think I can say that it seems to just be, like a purely advisory kind of function. It doesn't seem like this gives HRC really any room to make a decision or even, convey a recommendation to anybody. So in the sense that this doesn't actually involve any action being taken, I don't think it needs to be, noticed quite as specifically as other things.
Right. Could we add it to the agenda? Like,
I think that before we figure out exactly what type of notice would be appropriate, I think that it would be very helpful to figure out what this review actually entails.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have some problems with these two internal committees or boards inside the Common Council. A new Common Council will come every 4 years, and I don't believe there's any part of law that tells them which committees they have to have. A new Common Council, hopefully with advice from the President of the Common Council and the mayor, but not necessarily. They could restructure these internal boards or committees. And to put these committees, which could be temporary committees, to put them in the power of law, I'm uncomfortable with it.
I can understand that.
You're the lawyer.
So this says that we are going to review the actions. And we're going to sometimes make recommendations about the policy and procedure they're under. So where is that policy and procedure, Amy?
So my reading of this is that it is, let me pull up the packet that I sent you all. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Again, I think this goes back to just the phrasing of this provision, and it's got a lot of ambiguities in there.
Do we know what his goal was?
I think his goal was to have the Historic Resources Commission be involved to a greater extent than they are now, so that you guys can, have, a more significant opinion as, these demolitions go forward. But, again, I don't really know what this provision means. And I think it could be taken in a few different ways. I mean, I think you could read it as, just saying that it's going to be on the agenda. You don't ever really have to talk about it. And you can, and it's basically saying that you should review all of the city's regulations relating to demolitions and, make one report to them. Or it can be something more ongoing, but, are you reporting to them about, sort of like general, the demolition procedures, in a larger sense, or are you reporting to them about more specific properties? Are
So,
you supposed to make recommendations, to that, like, maybe this building shouldn't be demolished? I don't think this explains it.
so the, what's on the screen, it, review emergency actions within historic resource overlay under 130, section 13355.
Yeah, that's the building code.
That's the building code. And so what it says is, text that's, if you're in the packet, what it says underneath that is that Historic Resource Commission shall review and assess the policy and procedures related to emergency actions taken under section 133 of the building code of the city of Albany with regard to structures within historic resource overlay districts no later than 180 days after the effective date of the local law. The commission shall submit a report of its findings and any recommendations with regards thereto to the mayor and common council. So my question,
I mean, this is, they can periodically make recommendations.
right, and that what 13 is saying is that it then shall be a standing agenda item.
It would seem to me that we would like to understand the policy and procedure. We'd like to study it, understand it, and see if we have any recommendations to it. We'd probably like to review that periodically, say annually, because we see more demolitions or there's a change of staff and things seem to be going differently or whatever. And maybe what would be on our standing agenda item? Something like the buildings that are threatened, the buildings that have been lost, so that we receive that information. Somewhere else in this proposed language, I can't remember where it was, or Erin, maybe you remember.
Yeah, I can go for it. I think I know exactly.
We commented that we'd like documentation. I remember saying Jack wasn't at that meeting.
Yep.
Certainly I would imagine him saying that, but I don't think that was here. But I would think we would like to know and understand the policy and procedures and see if we have anything to offer there.
So I would like to see this provision explain what information you guys are going to get. You guys have mentioned numerous times that you'd like to have photos of these buildings before they're torn down. So I think that's something that we can put in there. And then I think, you also want to see the engineering report and, any other documents that are relevant to the, the demolition order. There's also the question of timing. With many of these demolitions, there's not a whole lot of timing between, when the demolition order is made and when the demolition actually starts. It seems possible, though, that in some cases there might be enough time for you guys to, to call a special meeting, in advance. But I'm not sure that that's the intention here, or that it would really, be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think in that short period of time we have much opportunity to engage.
Yeah.
So I think it's either all at the end after the building's lost, which is, I think, not our intent or goal, nor would it be Richard Conti's goal. The goal is how to save buildings, I think.
Right.
And having the list of the, well, I'm sorry, let me back up one second. Does anybody else remember, was it a conversation that any of you were involved in? I remember having it where we were asked about what our buildings, or we talked about identifying our priority buildings or some of the most important in the city so that those could be protected. So I would imagine that, I would imagine that Rick LaJoy may have a list of buildings that he's watching or that have moved in. They're either just in the vacant building registry, or they've had community has noticed his office that there's problems there, or they're watching, however they get to watch it. It would be nice to know what that list looks like, because then it would be a reasonable effort on our collective part to say, okay, well, this one would be too bad if we lost, just to prioritize those so that if there is any additional efforts for stabilization or protection, we're communicating that to them.
Are you saying you'd like to see something like this in legislation?
I'm just trying to figure out, like everyone else, I guess, what this proposed legislation means and what would be useful for us to do, and therefore how do we state it?
So
I know one of the things that Richard had brought up at the land use meeting that myself and John were at, as well as Amy and Brad Glass, was that this would be kind of a post-declaration notification. And that it would not be a process where the HRC would get to review it and make a determination that this, once the emergency declaration has been declared, the information would then be compiled and shared with the HRC. So much like the emergency demolition notification process that came out of the historic preservation plan, and the letter that you all had put together last year that went to Chris Spencer.
So I talked to Rick LaJoy briefly before the meeting tonight. He had another meeting scheduled, so he wasn't able to come. But we're gonna. I asked to talk with him, at some point over the next few days, and I'd like to ask him, I think, what type of information, what kinds of reports can he actually get for us? My sense is that, buildings and codes has, they have a decent amount of information in their, in their code tracking system where, I want to see what he thinks he can get in terms of, I think he can provide more than just the number of vacant buildings in each category. And, it'll be, I think it'll be helpful to understand what information, he has that might be, helpful to you guys in terms of trying to prioritize historic buildings.
I had a really interesting conversation. Well, he said something so interesting. I was talking to him last week, and he kind of turned his head and looked at a sign or something that was posted on his board, his bulletin board, I guess. And he said, it's been 25 days since a demolition. And it reminded me of a work site sign that, tells you how many days since an injury.
So those kinds of statistics would be great to have.
And he was very, very proud of it. And so he's pretty committed and he's making progress. So I would think that he, the extent that we could support him or whatever. But that was great when he kind of just said, it's been 25 days since a demolition. And that's all. Yeah.
He made an interesting comment at that meeting as well about within 3 years, he hopes never to see a demolition in Albany again, or something along those lines. Does anyone recall that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he did say that.
And then how does that build up to his that's why understanding the policies and the procedures, it's confusing. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the challenges, and Aaron, you can comment on this if I'm wrong, but he's got a nice little pot of money from the RISE program that he's had over the last year, 2 years to run. So
Yes.
part of that, if I'm not mistaken, has permitted him to possibly get more staff, possibly SAM, some of the vacant building survey work, but also possibly run a test program, a pilot program where he's taking some funds that normally would have gone towards demolition and been able to use them for stabilization.
Yeah, so, I mean, they've definitely been working towards doing more stabilizations when buildings come up. But the City Rise, they have a pot of money that is going towards the rental property emergency stabilization fund. With hopes that, buildings that potentially either may deteriorate or be, coming down the line for, potential vacant properties, they can get those funds out to, repair and stabilize those structures. They're doing drone training, so I believe 10 of the code inspectors, 10 code inspectors and building inspectors will have their certification for drones, and they'll be using drones to be able to go out and do survey of properties, and especially properties that they have difficulty either accessing or getting around and being able to look at the roof structure, look at back walls and things like that. So we have a drone. I know that they just, I think, completed January, December, their first portion of training. And then I think that there's funding for a couple more code inspectors out of the City Rise as well. So Sam and I had discussed at some point having him come back to kind of give an update on what he is working on and where he is with the vacant building survey and a number of projects that he's working on.
My concern is that we've gone through many years of not having anyone who seemed to care about the vacant buildings in the historic districts or otherwhere. And we've got someone now who seems pretty committed and is well resourced for it, but that's not forever. And so maybe it's a very good time to get clearer on any potential engagement with the HRC, whatever that means, which I think is what we're trying to find out, because Rick won't be there forever and we'll continue to have buildings that are threatened.
Right. I'll just let me run through the actual emergency demolition process. So the notification, what Councilmember Conti is establishing is that whenever a property within a historic district, when there's a declaration of an emergency action, and he did identify that the emergency action, like I said earlier, is either a demolition or a stabilization, that the commission shall be notified with the structural or engineering report and any other findings for the determination of the action.
Notified when?
Richard Conti said that it would be a post-declaration notification. So it would be once the action has been called by the chief building, the commissioner, or by Rick or the director of the building department, it would be a post-declaration notification.
But it has to have a term, 24 hours, 48 hours, a term.
Well, and that's, if I believe, and that's something that we can bring to them. That's exactly what this is for. I believe when we had sent the letter to Chris Spencer last year. Let me just see. We didn't ask for a specific, you didn't ask for a specific time period, but just said as soon as available. I do believe that the structural reports have, we can clarify this, and again, this can be, you know, part of the policy and procedure review by the HRC. I do believe that the structural reports have to be in with submitted to the building department within a specific time frame, but I do not.
Whatever the time is of calling in the potential demolishers, it would be the same time. So if within 10 hours you brought in somebody, you should say within so many hours. You don't, you know when you've got a problem, and that's when you call in the people who are making emergency biddings.
They
And that
usually
should
get
be
the
exact
engineering.
same time that you tell the HRC.
They usually get the engineering report pretty quickly, you know, because these are emergency situations.
Give it the same time.
Is there a structural report for every emergency demolition?
It depends on what the exact problem is. You know, there is a report for each one, but some of them they're able to access more or less of the building.
But I believe, Amy, I do believe that there's a report for every building.
Yes, there is. I mean, I'm not nearly as familiar with them as you know, I'm sure Rick and many other people are, but the ones that I have seen, they do vary somewhat in, you know, how much information they have, and I think that's often dependent on this, you know, what's actually going on with the building.
The point is you'd like to avoid the after the fact, too late to do anything about it announcement. If you are making the decision, and it could be the fire department has to be informed and the building department has to be informed, then HRC should be informed at the same time. Theoretically, it's a carbon copy, to use a phrase that is obsolete now. But when you notify one, notify them all at the same time, not after the fact.
So what would we get from that, Jack? I agree. That's almost like a wow, why aren't we already? I agree, but then what? So we get notified. What do we do then?
Well, if you're on the commission, you're going to read it, you're going to feel a sense of alarm, and you'll start to determine what to do about it. Is this the way it looks, and what should we be doing? Is there a funding available? Is this dangerous to the general public? But if you at least know about it, you can decide what to do depending on what the circumstances are, who's involved in this, what happens to the building next door to it. Sometimes the endangerment that's made is more for the whole neighborhood and the buildings adjoining than it is on whatever the particular specific problem is with tunnel vision. But I think if you know and you're on the board and your chairman and the person who's acting as the staff knows right away, you can do something. Whereas, you know, if you had to call the fire chief and you had to tell him or her, then where's that theoretical electronic carbon copy? Hey, we got a problem with such and such a number, such and such a street, and this is what we're finding.
I think there might be,
give it fairness and equality and equity, that these are the people that have to be involved, the building department and code enforcement and fire in some cases, even police in some cases. Oh, and at the same time, HRC.
There might be some additional information that you might be able to capture if you were getting the notification later. That's the one thing that I would add, you know, in terms of, you know, when they make the initial declaration, you're not gonna like have, you know, how much the demolition is costing.
Right.
But, you know, are there are any secondary problems discovered during the demolition?
Yeah,
you know, photos of the site afterwards. So I'm not, I mean, I don't know if that kind of information is important to you guys. Or if you want two notifications at the time of the declaration. and
Will
then
be, but I
later.
think the important thing is to get the earliest practical identification of a problem. And yes, it may take a day, it may take 2 days, there may be an engineering concern, there may be a photographic concern, but the minute you know it's a problem, if you had to call anybody with it, then you can call to us at the same time.
No, I agree. I think having that immediate notification, just puts us in line with the other groups that are being notified. We have some different interests. We're not going to stop a true emergency, and don't intend to. And then as you say, it could be 2 notifications. They follow up with the engineer's report and whatever documentation accompanied this demolition. But at least knowing that it's happening, and if they can't take a photograph, one of us can run out and take a photograph. I mean, we're finding these things so long after the fact sometimes that it's a little embarrassing.
Mhm. I know with
It's a really good idea because it also just raises historic preservation as a additional legitimate concern in that process. I don't know that we will, without kind of working a little harder of how long and how do we engage and do we review the engineer's report or not, or I mean that sounds pretty intense, right, within a short period of time. So I would hope something's good there, but I think at a minimum it says, wait, this is an historic building and it's important. So I just think it elevates the significance of that building in a very positive way. But I don't think this helps us save as many buildings as we'd like because it's really at the 11th hour. So I'll kind of go back to the other previous discussion we had as to how do we get engaged early on to help save buildings.
Yeah, and I think that, we need to have a discussion with Rick and find out exactly what they're looking at, how determinations are made, and then talk and work with Sam on some of his vacant building projects that are going on, identifying, where HRC can help and where that falls also in line with our preservation plan and a lot of the vacancy action items that are identified within the plan and moving those forward.
One easy thought is assuming that they're going to continue with the vacant building registry and they have an overlay that already can spit out what's in what historic district, that periodic reports about the vacant buildings. At least we would have a list of buildings within our districts that we should have then perhaps it behooves us to be watching.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, John, go ahead.
One other thing.
I'm going to say having that.
BRC, the general public has no idea what a BRC is. Let's get it out of the legislation and spell it out what it is. We should get rid of any of that type of language because the public may want to read this and know what it means.
I'm a big fan of that.
It's typed out. I abbreviated it. I'm sorry.
I mean, if we are informed and communication is shared, then we know how to target our efforts. We'll notice trends. That's why post is kind of post.
Well, and that does go into like the next amendment to the existing building code, which quarterly reports are currently going to the mayor and the common council. And we have been added in specifically for structures in historic districts. But and this would be because it's both buildings that have been declared vacant and are on the registry, new ones and ones that have been renewed. So this would give us information as to, where are we seeing large patterns of buildings that are coming on the vacancy, coming onto vacancy, and then also the number of buildings that have emergency actions. So both demolitions and stabilizations.
So this is additional proposed language that's being added to the, basically the language that governs the building department.
Correct. So it's something that's right. It's something that's already taking place for properties throughout the city of Albany and going to the mayor, and it would just be adding the Historic Resource Commission to an already established process, but specifically to our historic districts. So. Which I almost
from
think
this information, one could assume that this is also what's guiding the list of endangered properties that Rick is keeping an eye on.
Mhm.
And if from this, that, a bunch of addresses are called out of it so that we can all share in that information and know where some of the incipient problems lie. And if they're legal and property ownership issues that Rick is facing, there may be things that we can assist in clearing the way for stabilization.
I think one of the other indicators that he has access to reporting out, if people think it would be useful, is the properties with unaddressed code violations or multiple code violations. So that's, I mean, I don't know how we'd sort through it. I don't know if it's one violation or violations that haven't been addressed or whatever, but I think that's another way of identifying potentially endangered properties. At least to think about that.
I forget if I brought it up at the previous meeting that Sam Wells and I have been working within the building blocks platform to see if we were able to establish a way through building blocks to kind of identify pretty much those buildings, Maryland, that have violations or open violations or continuing complaints. And I know at one point prior to COVID, and one of Sam's working groups for vacant buildings, we had talked about that, and Kim Alvarez had brought up the idea of seeing if we could target it to specific districts and start to use that as like a case study to see if it was truthfully pulling properties based off of kind of the parameters we had set. So
that's an interesting idea, because I mean, taking it a little step further is I can imagine a potential situation where individual commission members had responsibility for watching whatever information we're talking about in a particular district, rather than all of us looking at all. I need to leave. I apologize. 7 o'clock meeting. So good luck. Good discussion.
if you do have any comments, Marilyn, feel free to send them to me any further
On the proposed here.
on the proposals. Yep.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wonder when a building is declared seriously endangered. And we're saying, by the way, if it's that serious that you've got to go to the fire department, the building department, code enforcement, put us on the list. Do we put the individual city council member at the same time?
When the building is added to the vacant building registry, or
Well,
when
no,
it's declared,
when there's a problem, and the problem is in the inner city, for example, and it's in the South End, is there an immediate notice? Because we're saying make sure the fire department knows, make sure the building department knows, code enforcement, put historic sites in there by all, pardon me for using the archaic term, historic resources involved in it. And by the way, is there an immediate note that goes to the person who's making over $20,000 a year to represent the people who elected him or her to get them there? Are they notified? They
I-
should.
I believe when an emergency notification is declared and the letter is sent to the property owner, it's also sent to the common council member for that ward.
Good.
So
I wonder if it's in law. I mean,
That's
if we're going and taking a look at the law and bringing it up to date, is there something that I or someone else, if they held that position, would have the same priority as a bureaucrat?
you can find out. It's a good question.
You know, I would obviously demand that they have an email address that they would be contacted. If they don't have one, that's, you know, the whole government doesn't have to collapse, but they should be on that list. I'd be mortified if I found out that something was happening in my district. And that's the reason why we have local wards. We've had them since 1683. The idea that somebody would be, he would be concerned about the whole city, but also have a special relationship with one particular ward. And they should have the dignity of being recognized because this is a serious problem. You're about to lose a resource or you're about to endanger the quality of your community.
Mhm. So those are all of the amendments and new language that they're proposing. We did, let me exit this real quick. John did submit comments that Marilyn, I believe Marilyn, Aaron, and Aaron had worked on after the last workshop meeting. Let me just stating, you know, that further clarification was needed on exactly what the HRC's role in the review process would be. Sorry. And more or less just asking for clarification as to exactly what the process is and what the expectation is of the HRC with these new regulations in place. There will be another land use committee meeting on February 16th. And I know that Richard Conti is looking to move this fairly quickly out of the committee and in front of the common council for a vote. So I don't know if anyone else has any further comments on it. If there's any other information that you all are looking for, any other, you know, any further clarification that we can share with the land use committee prior to their meeting on February 17th, February 16th. I can also I'm going to also pull up. This was the information that you all, yeah, the information you all had, or the letter that you had submitted, and I come from John, that was submitted to Chris Spencer last year after we had started the discussion of establishing an emergency demolition notification process based on the historic preservation plan, in which you had, the commission wanted information on the location of the property, photographs, the structural or engineering report, and if there was any information as to whether there was any other alternative considered to the demolition.
One thing that was mentioned in regards to this letter that has come up in conversation is the idea of photographs of the property would also include adjoining property. Because in many cases, something is demolished with or without any adverse effect, but the effect that it has on adjoining property is a concern. So that if that same letter were sent today, I think photographs of the property and its immediate environs would be useful.
Yeah.
Okay. So this, and Jack, this does address, it says the HRC requests that a procedure be established ensuring that the commission is provided with the emergency declaration letter on the day of the demolition, and the following items are sent to the chair of the commission as soon as available. And that's the address, documentation, the report, and then alternatives to demolition.
Good.
So we can, I mean, I'm from the discussion tonight, I'm getting that that is still kind of the feeling as to what you all would like to see. And I mean, we can definitely share this letter that from last year with Richard Conti, just establishing as, you know, what you had all previously requested, and if that can be reflected in the law.
Good.
And then also the addition of the neighboring and adjoining properties.
Minimum.
Does it make sense to consider, I mean, they talk about emergency action, and it's kind of a back in the legislation without a lot of definition. And I'm wondering if emergency action needs to be clarified as, you know, neighborhood preservation, building stabilization, and demolition. So that, you know, emergency action includes the following. It's not limited to, but it is inclusive of the following.
That's a good point.
And I think it only adds a few more words. I don't know if it gets too specific, but
I can find some other ordinances from, you know, different places in New York and run them by Rick, see what his thoughts are.
Yeah, because I do believe it's defined under the building code.
It is. It's in the building code, but I think it was Judy actually who brought up the general city law, which sort of like authorizes all of this, is fairly open-ended. And
Okay.
you know, I've certainly reviewed similar ordinances from other municipalities in New York State, and there are many different ways of, you know, phrasing everything. So I can pull some of those different definitions and criteria together.
Okay. We'll also ask for clarification on the review process and the standing agenda item.
And then there's a reporting obligation by the HRC that probably could stand with a little clarification.
Right, because the way that it's written, it states that it should be within 180 days from the adoption of the law, but it doesn't, the way that the sections seem to conflict because, let me find it. Or maybe, yeah, it's 180 days after the effective date of the local law. But then section 13, which is new language, says that HRC can periodically make recommendations in regards to the policies and procedures in regards to the building code. So.
Yeah, we don't want it to end at 180 days. We want
Right.
You know, maybe it's a quarterly report or something of that nature.
It almost would make sense to have it be after you all receive your quarterly reports from the building department, to then review that information and make a report back to the Common Council.
Yeah, it would be like the HRC's codicil to the quarterly reports from the building department. So
Right.
we're working somewhat in tandem with them or in cooperation with them to support some of their efforts. And we, of course, would advocate for stabilization whenever it's feasible.
I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of, you know, putting some type of language in there that would essentially, you know, authorize you guys to make recommendations to the Common Council, you know, for changes or further study, something that's a little bit more specific as opposed to just, you know, you'll make a report about something.
Yeah.
Because this is the building code, it you know, it would be outside of the USDO potentially in terms, so, you know, so it wouldn't go to the planning board, but, you know, if
Outside the what?
the USDO,
Okay.
you know, so there's a process under the USDO for, you know.
What is the USDO?
The Unified Sustainable Development Ordinance. It's our planning ordinance,
Just
planning and zoning ordinance. Yeah.
on principle. Let's leave those out. 'Cause we don't know who's listening.
That's how we get federal funding.
I apologize. There are procedures under the zoning though, so that changes to the zoning can be initiated by, you know, various municipal entities and officials. Those proposals go to the planning board for review and then they're transmitted to the Common Council. But for changes to the building code, it would be, you know, that process wouldn't necessarily apply. So if there was something in this legislation that at least said that you can, you know, transmit recommendations or proposals, you know, to the council, that might be a little bit more effective than just, you know, sending them a report once in a while.
Yeah.
But perhaps you don't want all that power.
Well, if we're to be taken seriously, maybe we do want some of that power. I mean,
It can be an optional power too.
yeah,
Of course, would be subject
You know
to.
when to step in and when you don't need to step in.
Mhm.
right.
It would still be the common council in charge of, actually making any changes.
But the reports that we generate could have recommendations to the common council or to the planning committee to amend certain sections of the ordinance.
Should be CC carbon copied as well.
Can I ask another question, which may directly or indirectly applies to all of this? A couple of weeks ago, or a couple of weeks before that, there was an alternation going on what used to be the Business Council's building opposite the old Harmonis Bleecker Library on Dove Street.
Mhm.
And I asked the question, how come we didn't decide whether this was being done appropriately to take the windows that were going into what are apparently apartments and break them down and turn them into doors? Or to make a comment on what kind of doors would go in there and what would be compatible for the building or the neighborhood. And what I was told was, well, we don't have jurisdiction over that one because that's locally designated, or it wasn't locally designated. I think somewhere in our language that we have historic properties, our language should say, whether it's the state, the national, or the local jurisdiction, this is where our jurisdiction is and where we have responsibilities. And that we shouldn't be in a position where an obviously historic building has what may or may not be a problem, will not be any of our business. And I think somewhere in the language of this, that we need the legitimacy of being concerned about an historic building or a non-historic, non-contributory building, which is nonetheless in a district which is historic, that we have jurisdiction. And
I,
that we say, hold on a minute, what's going on here? And to find out that you can do one but not the other, you can have jurisdiction with one but not the other, or advisory authority but nothing else. I think somewhere along the line, we've got to say whatever's going in here, if it's an historic building or it affects an historic area, we should have jurisdiction, concern, should be notified, and have a responsibility to act or choose not to act before something happens, which would presumably could compromise a resource.
I will pull the language. It is law that you only have jurisdiction over locally designated historic districts and locally designated landmarks.
Well, I wonder.
Hold on, Jack, hold on. Things that are on the state or national register of historic districts but are not locally designated do not fall under our jurisdiction. And unless they're using state or federal funding, then they go before the State Historic Preservation Office and National Park Service for review.
That's why I'm wondering if Richard Conte, who is supposedly bringing this piece of legislation, which already exists, bringing up to a level where it makes more sense, maybe this bill should include that.
So
This would be the time.
you do have there's some language in the city code under chapter 42. Aaron, I don't know if you look to those sections mostly or to the provisions in the zoning code, but there is some language there that, it says that you can make recommendations to the Common Council about the designation of individual structures or sites as landmarks or historic districts. So there's there's some other provisions, in terms of,
I agree with you, and the law does say that, and I agree with you. But it gives us no official role. We aren't even notified. We don't even have the options to consider where a comment would be useful or not. And I
Well-
just wonder if this is the time to update Richard Conti's bill. Maybe this is the time to legitimize the possibility of the Historic Resources Commission to know it has a legitimate role in buildings. I give that one example, but there are others throughout the city where we should have a role. We shouldn't be on the sidelines and being surprised to find out that something happened to a building because it wasn't in our specific local designation.
And it's kind of unfortunate because that particular building that Jack is talking about has been inappropriately butchered by the addition of 2 entrances. You have 3, you have the original entrance, and you have 2 brand new entrances. So you have a facade that has 3 entrances.
Mhm.
Staircases over the window wells.
I'm just wondering if you're going to
Would that
revise.
require an elevation of those properties or areas to a different category so that they do fall within our jurisdiction?
Well, as Amy said, you can make recommendations to the Common Council for local designation. But unfortunately, if all projects came to the Historic Resource Commission, you would be overstepping your legal boundaries by applying regulations to properties that don't fall under local preservation law.
Unless we change the law and made it more comprehensive, and we have.
Well, you wouldn't be changing the law, you would be designating properties. You
Yeah,
would need to,
elevating the category of those properties so that it falls within the category where we do have jurisdiction.
correct.
I wonder if Richard Conti should take a look at this incident.
But the law that Richard Conti currently has is just specifically to emergency demolition or emergency notification.
Mhm.
yeah,
You know,
it's a different discussion.
totally different discussion. But it would be could be something that another Common Council member brings up, or we can, have further discussion on, but the HRC does have the ability to make recommendations to the Common Council for areas to be locally designated. But to have to go through the process of changing the HRC's rules and regulations would be more difficult than just designating property. And by, reviewing and making recommendations to properties outside of locally designated districts is overstepping and applying laws to properties that aren't designated.
I think you're right. I think we got to move to Amy for a minute. Does this mean that a change in the law giving the jurisdiction of the Historic Resource Commission should include any state or locally designated piece of property? Is that the quickest, easiest, and less wordy way to do things?
Well, I think that the proposals that are on the table right now are really, they're limited to, the demolition
Right.
procedures, of the building code. So, I mean, I think that it makes sense to, to talk about, just, the review of those procedures. And then I think that this broader discussion is something that, it's certainly a good discussion and worthwhile having, but I think it's beyond the scope of what is being proposed right now.
Okay, for another agenda for another evening.
Yes.
No, I think you raise a good point, Jack, and I think it is worth talking about and analyzing, all of the districts that we have and what jurisdiction we have at different levels, over some of these properties, and see what, and how that meshes with the findings of the preservation plan.
Mhm.
I don't know if they captured that nuance, but, I think we've all had the understanding that we have jurisdiction in all of these areas, and come to find out that we actually don't in some of them, or it's limited. So I think we need to have almost an internal tutorial on, where are the boundaries and what do we have jurisdiction over? And then are there fringe areas or individual landmarks that we want to bring to a higher level and include them within our review?
Pine Hills is a total example.
Yeah.
Right. And, as John brought up, the preservation plan did identify areas to be surveyed for future districts. One of the action items was to do more designation of both individual properties and neighborhoods and districts. So we have, areas have been identified. And I do know that some neighborhoods, when we were putting together the preservation plan, had, expressed interest in being National Register districts. So it just, it's some, and every community has a mix of both, local and national districts, that some share designation, some, are only National Register, some are only locally designated. It depends on the level of protection that they're seeking, or whether they just want to be kind of a National Register honorary district in order to access, funding. So it all depends. And some districts don't qualify for National Register, some only qualify for local. It's a little all over the board. But we can definitely, it might be a good
workshop item.
Yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say that. So we can definitely set something up to go over all of that at some point.
Well, and I think using the preservation plan is kind of the guide,
Yes.
so that, we're doing it with some framework and guidance from that document.
Yes. Are there any other comments on Councilmember Conti's proposal?
Do you have a clear understanding of the conversation that we've had this evening and some of the areas that we think are deserving of some further clarification?
Yes.
Okay.
So I will.
Will a draft be circulated that we can take a look at?
Yeah, I'll work with Amy on taking some of her recommendations and putting something together, and then I will circulate it. And then we'll need to submit it to the land use committee prior to the.
I'm sorry, Erin, by the way, also that I didn't reach out to you beforehand. I want to speak with Rick about the proposals too. And, I think based on the discussion tonight, I think probably we can have just one set of proposed changes. But, depending, I have mentioned to Rick that if his interests diverge, very much, then we might have like separate comments from Corporation Counsel on his behalf, but I don't think we'll need to do that based on, you know, the feedback that we've gotten tonight.
Yeah, I think one document with all of our recommendations would be good to send to them.
I agree, that would be better.
So I will work on putting something together, and then we will circulate it. So and the meeting is in 2 weeks, so it's the Tuesday before our next HRC meeting, which is so.
Do we have any other business with developers or something like that for the 17th?
It's been very quiet. We have a National Register nomination coming to the HRC at the next meeting for review and public comment. And that's February. And I haven't put anything together yet for March. So, but it has, I don't know if it's just the time of year. You know, we usually hit like a little bit of a lull, but it's been fairly quiet in our office in terms of certificate of appropriateness and applications and building permits. So, Jen, do you have an archaeology update for us, or?
No, I was going to ask you if you had anything to share. And I don't know of any projects that are going to be involving ground disturbance.
The only thing right now, it might be coming down the line for you to keep an eye out, is 255 to 271 Clinton Avenue. It's a home leasing parcel. I don't think you were at the meeting. We did a seeker declaration back in December. You might have been out for that one. But it will be a parking lot, so there will be ground disturbance, but I'm not sure if they're doing a phase 1A.
Sounds very familiar. I'm going to check my work records. I'm wondering if we actually did that project. Let's hope so.
I requested it, so.
Okay, all right. No, thank you for letting me know. I'll check.
Okay, Jack, what were you saying?
I think they were all row houses. There's a bunch of them missing and they'd be turned into the parking lot.
Yeah.
And my mother lived there with her family, and I have a lovely picture of her in 1907 as a kindergartner in front of school number 7. The entire kindergarten class. So if somebody wants that, I'd be happy to make them a copy of it. Very, very familiar with it. And as I recall, they were all row houses, and there was a fire, and they demolished, probably 5 of them at least. That's how that open space is.
Yeah. Home leasing currently has their construction trailers there, and the parking lot would be that space, and then we go up and behind the row houses.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was us. That sounds very familiar, but I'm going to double check.
Good. But that is it on my part. And I spoke with Lee, and I will be reaching out to a couple of you as well to follow up about preservation plan projects.
What happened with the North Pearl Street, 54 North Pearl Street visit?
We are still trying to get that scheduled and shored up. So hopefully next week we will be going.
I don't know if anyone has driven by Lake Avenue, but the porch project that we looked at on that little house has come along quite nicely.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. It does look very nice.
No, it fits very well in the neighborhood, so. A success story amongst the weeds. Well, if anybody has anything else to bring up for this meeting, speak now or forever hold your peace till the next meeting. I would entertain a motion to adjourn if
Will we adjourn?
second.
A second.
Okay. All those in favor, wave.
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
All right.
Thank you all.
Very good.
Night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Have a good evening.